Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our LDAT webinar on the evaluation resource. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and any other cultures that might be joining us today. Before we begin the actual webinar, I just want to see if people can send us a quick hello in the Q&A box on the right hand side of your screen, and just let us know how many of you are there. The reason we're doing this is because towards the end we're going to leave a bit of time for questions. This is a fairly in-depth and large resource, so we'd like to kind of have an idea of how many of you are there and how long we should leave for questions at the end, just to keep it a bit more tailored to the group. And also letting you know that there is a 30-second delay, so basically what we say will take about 30 seconds to get to you, and so we'll be a little bit ahead. So towards the end we'll remind you that we need you guys to sort of send us questions so that we can start answering in those 30 seconds. So
but please put a question in at any time.
Yes, exactly. So throughout, and then also towards the end, and we'll try and address them as we go, or towards the end as well. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Is that right? Okay, so let's get going. So I'm not sure how many people joining us today are from existing LDATs and how many are from new LDATs. Welcome to those who are new. Just to let you know, we have a community hub which is dedicated to the LDAT program, and it's basically the place where everything goes. That's where you'll find all the toolkits, the community action plan which you'll need to submit. You'll find the other resources like the evaluation resource and the ethics resource in there as well, and the a practical guide to building successful LDATs. I've said that the wrong way around. Successful LDATs, a practical guide. Anyway, if you hover over the plan tab on the homepage, you'll see a drop-down menu, and through that you'll see toolkits and webinars, and under that you'll see additional resources. So have a look. So today we're going through the overview of the resource. We're going to talk about what is evaluation and the different types, and we're going to go through an example. So the example is going to contain basically like a de-identified version of a project or activity that's been done in the past, and then how that would fit within a CAP. So we'll go through that at the end. I won't say any more. And like Laura said, please unmute. Oh, not unmute, sorry.
Just
Q&A anytime.
Type in a question at any moment, and then as soon as we've got a break, I'll read it out and we'll do our best to answer it. So in the overview section, the overview of the toolkit pretty much talks about what is evaluation, what are the different methodologies. We give some links off to additional resources outside of the scope of just this toolkit. And then there are 4 really detailed, really robust examples. We're going to run through one at the end, but there are 4 different de-identified projects in the toolkit itself for you to have a read through. So,
sorry, I'm just having a look at that.
Yes, this webinar will be available offline. All of the webinars are posted, the recording of them are posted in the same location as the toolkits. Yeah, anyone who's, if you're having trouble with audio or your connection or anything, we will have the full webinar presentation available online afterwards. You know, if we usually get it up within a couple of days. So if you're having any major technological dramas, first of all, very sorry, but second of all, yeah, it will be available. It's always tech issues somewhere.
Yeah, I might just ask Yoga, our tech help today, if you wouldn't mind just logging in and checking if this is working from audio, and then we'll fix that as we go.
So in the resource, we do start from the basics just to make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of evaluation being how we collect information about delivery and impact, and then how that teaches us what's working and what's not, and how we can improve our program in the future, and then also how that feeds into really good reporting, you know, for our funders and for our other stakeholders. I might throw in just a note about the language here. Yeah, so look, evaluation can be, terminology can vary considerably depending on the organization and, you know, a lot of other contextual factors. So at the beginning of our toolkit, of our resource, we did lay out, defined, when we say this is exactly what we mean by it, and we also included some LDAT specific definitions as well. some of the...
Yeah, so we have the table at the front end provides the LDAT terminology, so things like the CAP, I can't remember now, but it's basically got LDAT specific terminology like activity, which is really out in the big wide world, it's maybe called a project. Like it can have different definitions. For us, it's an activity. And then we also have common evaluation terminology that's just kind of in the area, in the industry, things like intervention and I don't know what else to say. So, target population, that kind of stuff.
So we have clarified up front, when we use this term in the resource, this is exactly what we mean, and that's right at the start.
Yeah.
And then I particularly like the diagrams in the resource because I'm a very visual person. So things like the planning and evaluation cycle, which it might be a little bit small for you to see now, but there is a larger version of that image in the resource. And it's a general sense of when you would do which evaluations and how that would feed back into your program. We did think it was important to note that formative evaluations and outcome evaluations are not expectations for the LDAT program, especially with outcome evaluations. It's probably going to be out of scope for the activities that most people are involved in. If it's a special case where you're part of a larger, longer running program, it might be a possibility, but it's certainly not an expectation from the ADF.
And if it is a possibility and you have that available, you should include it in your evaluation processes or mention it because it adds validity to the process of or the activity that you've just implemented. Yeah,
it would be great knowledge to have, but it tends to be challenging.
Yeah.
And then the second section is really about evaluation methodologies and what should you be doing. Now my understanding is that in the community action plans there's a requirement for 2 process and 1 impact measure that are built in as part of that element of planning. And then the type of data that you're going to collect will be activity dependent. And the toolkit goes into really good detail about the different kinds of methodologies. Are you going to be collecting qualitative or quantitative data? Is it going to be mixed methods, which is the most likely? And there's a really clear direction in the toolkit about under those like qualitative, quantitative, what data gathering techniques are you going to use? Which I suppose would be more my... And I thought that this was really important to pull out, is how is it going to be useful? Not just from the perspective of you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste your participants' time, but there can also be ethical issues surrounding, depending on what kind of information you're collecting, how you're storing it, are you really going to be using it? So it's a huge foundational principle that all of the data we collect, there's a plan for what to do with it.
Just moving the camera. I hope that's better. There we go.
always check something.
Yes.
Did you want to talk through this one?
Sure. So basically the evaluation methodology section is really detailed. There's sort of key sections which include obviously setting an aim and objective, the different types of methodologies that you can use to actually do your evaluation. There's some important considerations in there about, in just a table format, basically talking about things like enjoyment of an activity or participant enjoyment, versus achieving your objectives. So an objective might be around, including a specific target group in an activity over a period of time for the purpose of blah. And enjoyment will only speak to whether or not people participated and how they felt at that time. So they're 2 really different things, and obviously it's important to capture enjoyment for the sake of knowing whether or not you've effectively engaged the community, but it may not actually meet the objective of transferring specific information about a specific thing that you're trying to do. The other one is ethics, so there might be specific ethical considerations around like working with a sensitive sort of space, so there might be a special community group that you're working with. An example might be recently arrived Australians, so they might have some different kind of needs or level of information that they might need in different sort of languages or even plain English that you might be able to provide. So it just depends on what the activity is. There's also participation barriers that you might need to consider, and the wording of, I guess, your evaluation. So if you're doing like a survey or something else, you might just want to put it into language that that person can understand, and also not using things like double-barreled questions. So, you know, asking two things in one question, but only giving the opportunity to answer with one response.
And
Yeah.
Speaking for myself, the first time I sat down to write a survey, which sounded really easy, I quickly learned that it is not easy. It's never as easy as you think. So getting that kind of guidance on wording is really important, so that you get the data, so that you're maximizing what you're getting out of the survey.
Yeah.
And also I think that the participation barriers is really important as well, just because, not only because you don't want some of your participants to be inadvertently excluded, but again, to really maximize what you're getting, the volume of data that you're getting, and that you're getting an accurate picture of that evaluation for all of your participants.
Yeah. And the other thing is, we tend to do this a lot in the office. The research team often uses us as guinea pigs for their surveys. So, you know, there's no reason why you can't test a survey just for that wording and that sort of, inclusion sort of angle. You can test it on your colleagues or people around you.
Yeah, and
that can always be really helpful.
That testing is invaluable, because especially when you've been putting a lot of time and thought into it, it's easy to think, because you know what you mean, that everyone else is going to know what you mean. But again, I have absolutely fallen victim to that one.
Yeah, same. So the other one is, the other two sections in the methodology section of the resource is gathering and interpreting the data. So that's a really important part. It talks about what kind of tools you might need and how you might go about looking at your data and what it means. And then preparing those findings and sharing those lessons is something that's really common across sort of different expert opinions. So when researching this topic, you'll find that preparing those findings and sharing your lessons is a really big part of evaluation, because other people can learn from it. We might all work for different organisations, or we might be doing different things, but ultimately we have this goal of prevention when it comes to AOD harm, and if one of us can learn from the other, that's really beneficial to everybody.
Absolutely.
So that's a really key part. I'll just mention this really quickly. There's some really great external resources around evaluation. We've provided two in the resource that you can go out and look at. One is the community toolbox. There's lots of examples in there. I encourage you highly to go and have a look. And the Program Evaluation Western Australia, just have a look at that website, have a peruse. It has some great examples as well, some information around evaluation. We're definitely not like the only ones that have written about this. So,
and again, more resources, especially around things like wording and language, and you know, don't say this, say things this way. Yeah, there's lots out there.
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of flown through this a little bit, but that's good, because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to these examples. I'll just reiterate, we have a 30-second delay. So anyone that joined us after I said that, what that means is that you're hearing us 30 seconds in the past, and if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll see them as we go. Hopefully we'll have a few queued up before we end, and we can go through them together. So did you want to go through this first bit?
Yeah, in terms of the way that it's laid out, or no, I'm happy for you to talk through it.
Okay. So basically,
it's a little bit small.
It's teeny tiny, sorry about this. Hopefully you guys can either Zoom or you have a printout there with you. So basically what this does is it breaks it up. Oh, thank you.
It's hard to talk through something that you can't see.
Yeah. So there's the key sections of this table are, you've got the name of your activity, which is pretty basic, target population, so who you're talking to, the aim of your overall activity, and then your activity outline. So these are the sort of things that you might already have in your CAP, or you might have had in your application, so that should be fairly straightforward. The things that you'll be working on as part of your CAP is things like the objectives. So what are the key objectives of the activity that you're running? Have you made them measurable? So, you know, that's working with that. This is also on the Community Hub, working with that principle of having SMART objectives, so things that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Yes, I got them all. So having those in your sentence is a really good idea. And then the key evaluation components within this table are the evaluation stage. So at what point are you doing this part of the evaluation? The method that you're using, so whether it's mixed method, qualitative, quantitative, the example questions or things that you might want to answer as part of that evaluation process, and then the analysis tool and data storage. So that part really speaks to that sort of data analysis and sharing that you do at the end. And then as you go through these tables, you'll see, sorry, I don't know what we've got on the next slide.
Yeah, so it's process on this, so it's the first two process measures.
Yeah, but on the next
and
one
then
is
impact.
Ah, cool, okay. So if you just go to the next slide. So this is what the table in the CAP will look like. And I just...
Sorry, the community action plan.
Yes, sorry, I should not talk in acronyms.
It's a habit around the office.
Bad habit. So basically this table is different, and the reason it's different is because it's not the everything of your evaluation. It's basically a summary to demonstrate that you have thought about your evaluation and what you'll do to deliver on your 2 process measures and your 1 impact measure. So have a look at this, become familiar with it. The reason we've provided the first table and this table is to sort of demonstrate to you how you might go about actually doing that evaluation and how you might summarize it in a CAP so that you can get approval for the funding that you're applying for. So this is not a copy-paste situation. It's really dependent on your particular activity. These examples are de-identified from existing projects or activities that have been done. So it's really talking to some real-life examples. And hopefully if you have any questions sort of throughout doing your community action plan and your work, you can go to your relationship manager and ask further questions. But this should just iterate how do we do it, and then how do we translate it into the kind of thing that the ADF might want to see. Again, just emphasising that this isn't like, if I copy this, I will get all the funding. It's really dependent on your community, the activity, how well you understand it, and that we understand that there's varying levels of understanding and experience when it comes to evaluation. So that's where the relationship manager comes on board, and that's where you can get some further support from them. But I guess...
But the examples are really detailed.
Yeah.
And it also goes through some very different types of activities, and then what different measurements relative to those activities would be. So yeah, look, it's what a lot of people have been asking for, sort of de-identified examples.
Yeah.
So there's 4 of them.
Yeah, and hopefully that is kind of enough. So I guess because we've got about 10-ish minutes to go, maybe let's just go through one of the evaluation stages for objective 1. So if I just go back a couple of slides. So for example, a process, so the objective is organise and deliver 3 basketball events in the next 12 months to engage young people and build community spirit. So the process measure is to assess the implementation of the intended activity. So we're looking at how it was implemented. It's a mixed method survey, so we're going to be looking at this at the conclusion of the event, so once the basketball events have been run. And it's going to be a survey with 5 questions, and it's going to be set up on a wall on the day. So basically it's going to have these 5 questions written up on a board, and people are given, the presenter or the organizer might say, thank you for coming. As part of the event, we'd love for you to contribute to the evaluation. Here are 5 post-it notes where you can write your answer and then stick it up on the relevant part of the board. So a question might be, did you feel included in activities today? And the answers are multi-choice. So it's 1 starting with not at all included, and 5 is totally included. Question 2 was, how well was the day organised? So this is again a multi-choice question. It just gives us a gauge for where we are on how we intended the activity to be implemented. So 1 is very poorly organised and 5 is extremely well organised. So important with these sort of scales to keep it consistent, because you're asking questions that are on a scale of 1 to 5, but the actual answer might be slightly different. You might want to have the negative side on the 1 and then the positive side on the 5, so that you don't confuse people because they might just want to do it quickly. Does that make sense? So you don't want to say one is not at all included in one question and then have one is extremely well organized for the next question. So keep it, I mean, this is kind of basic really, but just pointing it out.
No, I've absolutely read surveys where the scale positive to negative ends flipped and I either bungled my survey or had to be like, oh wait, that's not what I meant.
Cross it out, yeah. So there's also another one in here that's multi-choice. How much did you enjoy the activities you participated in today? So that's about the engagement part. And then there's a couple of short answers. So what was one thing we could do differently? Was one thing you learned about yourself or your community today? So it's about connecting the person back to that community and building that spirit. So you can see how that evaluation kind of really speaks to the objective. So it's talking about whether or not it was achieved well, whether it was organised, whether people enjoyed themselves. One thing you could do differently so that you can learn from your experience, and one thing you learned about yourself or your activity. How are you connected to these people that you're connecting with today? So it really, it's important for your evaluation to really speak to your objective, and you can think about these two things at the same time. So when you're setting your objectives, ideally that's when you're thinking about how you're going to evaluate that objective. And if you can't evaluate it, if you can't find a way, if you think it doesn't have enough meat on the bones, then that's a really good sign that you maybe need to modify your objective. And that's why we kind of talk about doing them at the same time. I hope I'm not being too basic with all of this, but hopefully, going through the obvious sometimes really helps solidify some of this stuff.
And I think the examples sort of increase in complexity as you go through them as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I think that the analysis tool and data storage
I didn't go
is
through that.
well, I think that that's a really helpful thing to get into. And so instead of just winding up with all of this data and then being like, now what do we do with it?
Why do we do this again? So obvious tools that you might use are the Microsoft Office suite. So things like Excel and Word, obviously, to type up what your responses might be. So in this instance, you've got a bunch of post-its on a whiteboard or a wall. You'd obviously take a photo first because we live in the digital age and it's good to have this stuff sort of saved up. And then you might type it all up. So you might have your 5 questions in columns and you might have your responses in there, and then it gives you an opportunity to create some whiz-bang graphs or something to sort of demonstrate how satisfied people were with it.
And I like the idea of, having it be a little bit more engaged with your target audience, where whether it's you're sticking things up on the wall, it's just a little bit different than sitting down with just a pen and paper survey.
And it kind of, I guess you kind of got a captive audience. So with that sort of thing, you can hand out sheets and ask for people to complete a survey on a piece of paper.
Or you lock the doors and hand out Post-it notes.
Or you don't let them leave. No, definitely don't hold people against
don't lock the doors.
We don't condone that. And then you can, I guess, once you've got it into Excel, that gives you the opportunity to then type up a little report. It's really useful to share that with other colleagues that might be working in the space, or even colleagues outside of your workplace that might be working in a different organisation, i.e. your partners within the LDAT. You'll be doing that anyway, but I guess if it's a report and it's typed up and it's something that you can speak to, then it's a really good opportunity to share. Should we go through?
Well, that's really a good outline of, sort of across the chart, how it works through the process, the 2 process, and then the 1 impact, and then giving that really good example of what that would actually look like in terms of the community action plan at the end. So,
okay,
I think it's probably the sort of thing that would be really helpful to read through in a bit of detail, just to give you a sense sort of what the expectations are and past examples of what other LDATs have done.
Yep. We do have another 5 minutes, so I was thinking there's a little bit of a delay on, obviously, like I've said, on our webinar. If people want to send them through now, that'd be great. I'll just spend another couple of minutes and we'll go through an impact measure. So this is for the same objective, and we're looking at assess the effect of the event's post-event conclusion.
And this is for the community basketball objective, right?
Yep. So it's a mixed method for this. So we're looking at quantitative count, engage with local health services 3 and 6 months after the conclusion, And qualitative, 3 focus groups, 15 minutes with up to 5 young people. So the questions we might want to ask health services specifically is, how many young people use the service before the events, and how many use the service 3 and 6 months after the events? So basically at these events, there's a focus to give out some information to young people around using these health services. So you want to gauge how many people actually follow through with that. Was there any noticeable change in the type of users of your service and the types of issues they were raising? So it's a bit of a deeper dive into what kind of things these young people that would have engaged with health services have actually engaged them about. And then the focus group questions look at what, if any, impact have the events had on your social life? So you're talking to young people about what's happened after basketball. What, if anything, do you do differently now because of the events? And would you want to see more opportunities like this to connect with other young people in the community, and what sorts of things might work for you? So this sort of questioning and inquiry would really require quite a lot of sort of note taking, and then a bit more data mining to try and find some themes. So that sort of qualitative assessment with the focus groups can be really rich in terms of what you find out from young people. Always keeping in mind that it depends on your sample size. So if you only manage to engage like 3 groups of 3, you might just want to say we've got some really key themes, but it would be great if we got a few more, you know, if it's a bigger community or something like that. And then with the qualitative stuff, with the quantitative stuff, it can basically just be a direct answer. So if you saw a spike in health service use, then you know that these things are really effective at getting some spikes, you know, and you might do that more frequently. So I hope that's clear. I've kind of really whizzed through it. It's all there for you to read anyway, so if you want to have a look at it.
It is a really dense and very detailed resource.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is what you want.
Yeah. And you can take, this was kind of designed, I think we've mentioned this already, as like a 3-part resource. So you can pull out the first, I think it's 2 pages. Yeah, first 2 pages are a pull out, just like a basics on what is evaluation. The second part is a bit more detailed, it's the meat behind it. And then you can even print out the examples if you wanted to like sit down with your community action plan and your other stuff and sort of flick through this as you're working. You don't need to have this giant thing with you all the time, but one of the things that we heard really clearly from our staff that work with LDATs is that this sort of 2-page piece where they can just really quickly pull out something that gives people a basic on evaluation, so that's there. That's kind of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
well,
say
thanks everyone.
thank you.
We'll hang around for another 10 or so seconds, 30 seconds, and we'll see if anybody else comes through the question.
I asked for questions a few minutes ago, so.
Oh, did you?
You know, I hope that just means that this was very clear, and yeah, hope the resource is useful.
Okay. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.